August 6, 1945. Hiroshima, Japan, 8:14 a.m. A 12-year-old girl named Miyoko is running late for school. She stops at the bakery on the corner, the same bakery she stops at every single morning, and buys a small rice cake. The old woman behind the counter smiles and tells her to hurry. Miyoko laughs, grabs the cake, and runs down the street. Her school bag bounces on her back. The morning sun is warm on her face. She will never reach school. Aku ang 34-year-old doctor named Michihiko. Hachiya is standing at the window of his home, drinking tea, watching the morning bird. He is thinking about a patient he needs to check on. He is thinking about what his wife is making for dinner. He is thinking about completely ordinary things, the way all of us think about completely ordinary things on completely ordinary mornings. His morning is about to become the most documented, most studied, most horrifying morning in modern human history. A streetcar driver named Tatsuo has just started his route. His car is full workers, students, mothers heading to the market. He rings the bell at the stop on Aioi Bridge, the beautiful T-shaped bridge in the center of the city, and waits for passengers to board. The bridge is the target, 31,000 feet above them. A B-29 bomber called the Enola Gay is making its final approach. Inside, a bombardier named Major Thomas Fermi is looking through his northern bomb sight. His crosshairs are locked on Aioi Bridge. In the bomb bay of the Enola Gay, a 10-foot-long cylinder painted gray is hanging, stenciled on its side, "Little Boy." The time is 8:15 a.m. and 17 seconds. Major Fermi releases the bomb. For 43 seconds, Little Boy falls, silently, invisibly. Miyoko is still running toward school. Dr. Hachiya is still drinking his tea. Tatsuo is still ringing his streetcar bell. 350,000 people going about the last 43 seconds of their normal lives. That is how long the world as they knew it had left. To understand how we arrived at that moment, we have to go back to a squash court at the University of Chicago. December 2nd, 1942. Enrico Fermi initiated the world's first controlled nuclear chain reaction. They split atoms, and in splitting atoms, they released energy. Within months, the United States launched the Manhattan Project, the most secretive, most consequential scientific program in human history. The scientific director was a 38-year-old theoretical physicist from New York City named J. Robert Oppenheimer. He built it anyway, because he believed that if America did not build it first, Nazi Germany would. At 5:29 a.m. on July 16, 1945 in the New Mexico desert, the world's first atomic bomb was detonated. Oppenheimer watched from a bunker, and as the fireball rose, a line from the Bhagavad Gita came to him. "Now I am become death." The crew of the Enola Gay were 12 men. Colonel Paul Tibbets was the pilot. He named the plane after his mother, Enola Gay. The tail gunner was Sergeant Bob Karan. He was the only crew member positioned to watch the bomb actually hit. He kept the camera. What he saw he described as a purple fireball, a column of smoke and fire boiling upward, and below it, where a city had been, nothing. Little Boy detonated at 1,900 feet. The temperature reached 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And in the streets below, the last thing they saw was a light so intense that it printed the shadows of human beings onto concrete walls. One final flash, and then simply the absence of everything. Setsuko was 13 years old. She was standing inside a building approximately 1 mile from the hypocenter when the bomb detonated. She remembers the teacher beginning to speak. She remembers the morning light coming through the windows. And then, a blinding blue-white light that seemed to come from everywhere simultaneously. And then darkness, complete total darkness. She was unconscious, buried under rubble, pinned. When she came back to awareness, she could hear voices in the darkness around her. Her classmates, some crying, some calling for their mothers, some reciting prayers. She could smell smoke. She could feel heat. She began to move, pushing against rubble, pulling herself through gaps in the collapsed ceiling, crawling toward a tiny point of light. She pulled herself through. She emerged into the open air. And she stopped, because what she saw, her brain could not process it. The city she had walked through that morning was gone. In every direction, as far as she could see, flatness, rubble, fire, columns of black smoke rising so high, they disappeared into a sky that had turned the color of a bruise, and falling from that sky ash, fine white ash drifting down like snow, landing on her hands, on her face. She would later learn that some of that ash was not ash. She was standing in the center of a city of 350,000 people, and it looked like the surface of the moon. Now, I need to tell you something that the history books almost never include. The people who were walking, not running, walking slowly, in long silent processions, moving away from the center of the city, thousands of them, in complete silence, arms extended in front of them. Why the arms extended? Because the heat of the initial flash had burned the exposed skin so severely that the skin had separated from the underlying tissue. It was hanging from their arms, from their faces, from their hands, sheets of skin hanging like wet paper, like melted wax, and they had learned through pure instinct that if their arms touched their bodies, the hanging skin would stick and tear. So they held their arms out. Their faces were so swollen from burns that their eyes had closed shut. Their lips were so swollen they could not speak. And they walked through the rubble of their city, barefoot on broken glass and hot debris, in absolute silence. Because the pain was beyond screaming. Because there are levels of suffering that exist on the other side of sound. Setsuko stood and watched them pass. She said the thing that stayed with her more than anything else was the silence. That 10,000 people in agony, and the only sound was their feet on the rubble. Let me tell you what the city looked like from above. An American weather reconnaissance plane flew over Hiroshima 1 hour after the bomb. The entire area was covered by a churning mass of smoke, fire, and dust, a column rising to 50,000 feet. Where the city had been from the air, there was simply a brown-gray smear, like someone had taken an eraser to the map. On the ground, the destruction was absolute within a half-mile radius. Not damaged, not destroyed, vaporized. At the hypocenter, the ground temperature reached 7,000 degrees. Roof tiles had melted. Granite steps had been turned to powder. And in some places there were shadows. Dark outlines burned into the stone. The shape of a person caught in the moment of the flash. One of the most famous shadows is of a person sitting on the steps of the Sumitomo Bank building, 250 meters from the hypocenter. We know only the shape they left behind, sitting slightly hunched forward, arms resting on knees, waiting, just waiting, and then gone. The explosion ignited thousands of fires, which merged into a firestorm. A firestorm is a self-sustaining atmospheric event. As the heat rises, it creates a column of hot air moving upward, pulling cooler air inward, feeding the fire with oxygen. Survivors near the rivers describe being pulled toward the flames by a wind that grew stronger the closer the fire got. The rivers, the Motoyasu, the Honkawa, the Kiyobashi, became the only refuge. Thousands of survivors threw themselves into the water. They held on to bridge pylons, keeping their heads above water, watching the city burn on both banks. The rivers of Hiroshima by the evening of August 6th were full of the dead. Floating face down, Dr. Michihiko Hachiya, the director of the Hiroshima Communications Hospital, was thrown through the air by the blast wave. He walked to his hospital. What he found there he documented in a diary that became a vital primary source of the 20th century. Thousands of patients pouring in, people with burns covering 80% of their bodies, people with glass embedded deeply in their flesh. Dr. Hachiya wrote in his diary on the evening of August 6th, "There was nothing to do but watch people die." 3 weeks later, doctors noticed something they could not explain. Patients who seemed to be recovering began to deteriorate suddenly. First high fever, then hair falling out in clumps, then spontaneous bruising appearing on the skin, purple and black patches spreading. The bone marrow, the system that produces blood cells, had been destroyed, not by the blast, by something invisible. By radiation. Families who had survived August 6th together watched each other die in September, in October, from something they could not see. Leukemia rates spiked in the early 1950s. Thyroid cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer appearing 10, 20, 30 years after the bomb. And 3 days after Hiroshima, on August 9, 1945, the United States dropped a second atomic bomb on the city of Nagasaki. 2 bombs, 2 cities, 220,000 human beings, and 650,000 people survived. The Hibakusha, who woke up on August 6th as ordinary people, and spent the rest of their lives carrying something no ordinary language could describe. She was 2 years old on August 6, 1945. Her name was Sadako Sasaki. She lived with her family in Hiroshima, close enough to the hypocenter that the blast wave shattered every window in their home. Her mother found her outside, alive, unburned, no visible injuries. The family believed they had been lucky. Sadako grew up. She went to school. She was small and quick, one of the fastest runners in her entire school. Her classmates called her the tornado. She loved the feeling of wind against her face and the world blurring at the edges. In January 1955, Sadako Sasaki was 11 years old. She was at school when she felt dizzy. The dizziness did not pass. The doctors ran tests, and then they told her parents what the tests had found. Leukemia. Radiation-induced leukemia. The bomb that had spared her had left something behind, inside her bone marrow. Waiting. For 10 years it had been waiting. In Japanese tradition there is a legend. If you fold 1,000 paper cranes, you are granted a wish by the gods. Sadako began to fold. From medicine wrappers, from the paper bags that fruit came in, from scraps that nurses brought her. She folded in the mornings and late at night, when the ward was quiet and the only sound was the breathing of other sick children. The act of taking a flat square of paper and transforming it into a bird with wings was an act of hope. She folded 644 cranes. On October 25, 1955, 8 months after she was admitted, Sadako Sasaki died. She was 12 years old. In 1958, a statue was unveiled in the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. A bronze girl holding a golden crane toward the sky. At the base of the statue an inscription reads, "This is our cry. This is our prayer. Peace in the world." In the years after the war, Japanese society did not embrace its atomic bomb survivors. It stigmatized them. Employers refused to hire Hibakusha. Families refused to allow their children to marry them. The fear was not just of the person. Setsuko Thurlow did not stay silent. From the 1950s onward she spoke. She told the story of the morning she crawled out of the rubble. On December 10, 2017, in Oslo, Norway, Setsuko Thurlo stood at a podium. She was 85 years old. She said, "I speak as a member of the family of Hibakusha to demand a world free of nuclear weapons." J. Robert Oppenheimer after the war became the most famous scientist in America, and he was haunted. In 1954, Oppenheimer's security clearance was revoked. He was treated as a potential enemy of the state. There is a place in Hiroshima called the Genbaku Dome. The downward force compressed the structure rather than toppling it. The peace flame of Hiroshima has been burning continuously since 1964. It will burn until every nuclear weapon is destroyed. Remember them not as victims, but as people. As the girl who folded 644 paper cranes because she wanted to live.